The member for Kiiwetinoong.
Hello, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Premier. Why did the government drop reconciliation from the mandate of the Ministry of Indigenous Affairs? And what is behind the decision to have the Minister share his time between Northern Affairs, mining, energy, and Indigenous Affairs?
Premier.
Minister of Indigenous Affairs.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and miigwech to the member. I congratulate him on winning a region of northwestern Ontario that's near and dear to my heart, as I had served it in my former capacity as the Member of Parliament for the Great Kenora riding and spent several years there working as a nurse and a lawyer in those communities. Mr. Speaker, we ran a campaign that reflected the needs for all Ontarians, and we appreciate that Truth and Reconciliation represents a dark chapter in Canada's history. Moving forward, Mr. Speaker, we intend as a government to honour the principles of truth and reconciliation, but focus, Mr. Speaker, on the things that Indigenous communities are asking for, a piece of the prosperity that all Ontarians have come to expect in their communities. And moving forward, whether it's resource revenue sharing, Mr. Speaker, for municipalities and Indigenous communities in this province, but particularly in Northern Ontario, we're going to make sure that those Indigenous communities have access to the kind of prosperity that we all expect from government.
Supplementary question.
Thank you again, Saul Mamakwa from Kiiwetinoong riding. Speaker, First Nations are concerned about the government's step backward away from reconciliation. Anishinaabe Nation Grand Chief Alvin Fiddler said, "It is difficult to see how progress can continue to be made when First Nations are reduced to only on how they relate to the government's ability to access the resources within our lands." During the campaign, the Premier famously said he would get on a bulldozer himself to get the Ring of Fire underway. And he also said that he would stop talking and start doing. But from the perspective of First Nations, the only way you can start doing anything in their territories and our territories is to start talking to our territories. Speaker, how does the Premier propose to do this with a part-time minister?
Thank you. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I can assure the member opposite that there's nothing part-time about the devotion and the skill that I bring to this portfolio. This ministry stands alone with a minister who has spent more than 8 years of his life living and working in Indigenous communities, mostly in northwestern Ontario, but in fact across Canada, Mr. Speaker. I have a keen sense and great relationships with Indigenous leaders. Some of these folks are some of my closest friends across the region, Mr. Speaker. We're going to ensure that First Nations have prosperity. The member mentioned Ring of Fire. Those communities are doing more than just talking. They're working with the private sector, Mr. Speaker, creating economic opportunities and creating jobs for those isolated and remote communities. It's high time, Mr. Speaker, and we're going to deliver on those promises for prosperity for Indigenous communities.